Can you imagine being a scientist in Trump's EPA? So we, the EPA scientists, we've finished our 5-year review of industrial soot, the stuff that comes out of smokestacks, coal power plants, and vehicle tailpipes, and we're recommending strengthening the regulations. Our science has found that 16,000 to 17,000 lives would be saved if we strengthened regulation. No. Imagine being the EPA dude, which I think is his official title, being told by scientists that, hey, this slight change in regulation will save lives. Imagine being told that and saying, no. Are you ready for the Trump administration's excuse? EPA Administrator Andrew Wheeler, a former coal lobbyist, said that new research that has emerged about the health impacts of particulate matter did not, quote, come out in time for this 5-year review process. Really? Can you get a more pathetic lie? I don't know how you argue that there's some sort of debate. It's soot. It's shit in the air. We understand soot. Even I know that breathing shit in the air is bad for your health, and I didn't even go to pollution school. So Trump is doing the equivalent of throwing a temper tantrum and wrecking his room on his way out the door of the presidency. As Reuters writes, quote, the decision is one of several at the EPA that the outgoing Republican Trump administration is rushing to finalize ahead of Democratic presidential-elect Joe Biden's January 20th inauguration, including one setting new limits on ozone, another limiting the kinds of scientific data that can be used in policymaking, and another making it harder to justify new pollution regulations. I mean, let's get real. It's completely unsurprising that the incompetent administration that has had the worst response to the COVID crisis, let's not forget that the United States has the most cases and the most COVID deaths, it's unsurprising that such an administration would be so callous as to ignore its own scientists and say, no, 16,000, 17,000 people a year dying because of soot? I got coal donors, bro. I got to listen to them first. Because corporate profits are more important than science, facts, or your life to the Trump administration. This story is an example of how wrong the argument is that all regulation is bad. Did you know that the tyrannical government is regulating streams in Rand Paul's backyard? Look, there are for real bad regulations that actually hurt personal freedom. What substances you can or can't put in your body, whom you can or can't marry, what a woman can do with her body, and so on. But most regulations, the good kind, the kind that limits powerful people and corporations from being able to harm us, which doesn't limit our freedom. That kind of regulation, the kind of regulation in this story that would limit the amount of soot that corporations can dump into our air. That's safety policy. That's policy that protects us. Simply making this environmental regulation adequate means that thousands of people who are currently healthy will have the freedom to continue living without asthma, without bronchitis, without heart disease, and without all the medical bills associated with all that. Strengthening this regulation would give 17,000 people per year the ultimate freedom, the freedom to continue living for all of our wonderful freedoms in America, and there are a lot of them. They're all useless if you're killed by corporate greed. I've heard a lot about how the Republicans want to bring us back to the 1950s, and in social aspects, like putting women and black people in their place, sure, yeah, I could see why conservatives want to bring us back to the 50s in those respects, but the 1950s was also a time at which corporations paid the highest tax they've ever paid. Regulations on big business, particularly Wall Street, banking, they were at their absolute peak from the 1930s through the 1970s, which is a time that encompasses what's called the golden age of the American middle class, which I'm sure is a total coincidence. Republicans don't want to bring us back to then. They want to bring us back to the 1920s, to a time when there were no child labor laws, when there was no minimum wage, when there was no Social Security. Not strengthening this soot regulation is a small part of that agenda. That's what Reaganomics, that's what corporatism, that's what neoliberalism, whatever you want to call it, that's what that's all about. We've lived under Reaganomics for 40 years. We've seen the results. It does not work for the bottom 90%. If you're a conservative or a right-winger, it's time to acknowledge reality. It's time to have some guts. It doesn't take intelligence to understand politics. It takes courage. I'm not left because the arguments sound good or it sounds compassionate. It's because I've seen the results of conservative ideology and I've lived the consequences. So I promised that this story would have a link with COVID. I found a study that looked at a bunch of other studies, and you'll be surprised to learn this: that cleaner air leads to healthier lungs, which means greater resilience to COVID-19. This is why you come to this channel, because I give you amazing, amazing information like that. More specifically, for every millionth per cubic meter increase in particulate matter, there is an associated 8% increase in the COVID death rate. So if you're not into gobbledygook, basically the EPA scientists were saying, hey, the current limit is 12, what was the overly technical? 12 millionths of particulate matter per cubic meter. How did I not just remember that? So they want to bring it from 12 to 8. In other words, just that 4-point drop is a 32% drop in the COVID death rate. So that's what we're talking about here. Of course, the people who will be most affected by this government negligence will be black people, Latinos, indigenous people, and poor white people. And the people who are most affected by COVID are black people, Latinos, indigenous people, and poor white people. Support this weird political channel by liking this video and clicking subscribe. This is Alien Perspective. Thanks for watching.